Picture a fire 100,000 years ago. You're crouched close to the flames, and around you sits everyone you have in the entire world. Maybe 30 people, the whole band. You know every single face. You watch a mother press a baby to her chest. You watch two small kids wrestle in the dirt and shriek with laughter. Here, family isn't a word for a holiday. It is the only thing standing between you and death. Now look harder around that fire. There's a woman with gray in her hair, past her childbearing years, no baby of her own. There's a man who never fathered a child, an aunt who never paired off, an uncle with empty arms. In a world built entirely around survival and breeding, these are the people who will leave no children behind them at all. So what happened to them? Were they dead weight, extra mouths to feed in a place that counted every single berry? Were they pushed out to fend for themselves? The honest answer turns everything you assume about survival of the fittest completely upside down, because some of those childless people may be the single biggest reason you are alive to hear this. Let's start with a number that should not make any sense. A human child is the most expensive thing in the entire natural world. Not expensive in money, expensive in calories, in years, in sheer helplessness. A baby chimpanzee can cling to its mother's fur within hours of being born and start feeding itself soft foods in a couple of years. A human child cannot do anything close to that. Human kids stay useless, in pure survival terms, for a shockingly long time, often a full decade or more, before they can reliably feed themselves. The reason is sitting inside their skulls. A human brain is enormous. It grows painfully slowly, and it burns fuel like a furnace, roughly a fifth of a child's entire energy budget, just to keep the lights on up there. That giant, hungry brain is the whole point of being human, but someone has to pay for it, and that someone is the mother. Now here's the problem. A single hunter-gatherer woman cannot possibly gather enough food, carry enough water, and dig enough roots to grow one of these bottomless little brains on her own. The math simply doesn't close. She needs more calories flowing in than two hands could ever supply. But here's where it gets strange, because humans then do something that should have finished us off entirely. We stack our children. A chimpanzee mother has one baby, then waits until it can mostly look after itself, 5 or 6 years, before she has the next. She raises them one at a time. A human mother doesn't get that luxury. She has a newborn at her breast, a toddler clinging to her hip, and a 5-year-old tugging at her leg, all at the same time, all hungry, all completely dependent on food she cannot possibly gather alone. By the cold arithmetic of survival, this is insane. One woman, 3 helpless children, in a world with no farms, no shops, no stored food. The books should not balance. So who, exactly, is paying the difference? The answer is nearly everyone who isn't the mother. Scientists have a word for it, alloparenting. It literally means other parenting, care given to a child by someone who didn't give birth to it. And human beings are absolutely drenched in it. Watch a baby in many hunter-gatherer societies today, and you'll see it passed from arm to arm within its first hours of life, held, soothed, and carried by older sisters, aunts, cousins, grandmothers, and women it isn't even related to. The anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy built an entire book around this idea, called Mothers and Others. Her argument is quietly explosive. In the other great apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, a mother almost never lets another individual hold her newborn. The baby is hers, full stop. A chimp mom will guard her infant obsessively for months, but a human mother routinely hands her most precious, most vulnerable possession to somebody else on the very first day. That single difference, Hrdy argues, might be the thing that made us human. Because a baby who needs to win over a whole circle of caretakers has to learn to read faces, to charm, to hold eye contact, to figure out what others are feeling. The endless human obsession with what other people think of us? It may have been born right here, in a baby who survived only by getting a village to fall in love with it. But the most important helper of all wasn't a sister or an aunt. It was someone that biology says should not even exist. Here is a genuine evolutionary riddle. In almost every species on the planet, a female reproduces right up until she dies. A fish, a lizard, an elephant, they stay fertile to the end. To natural selection, a body that can no longer make babies is essentially invisible. There's no obvious reason to keep it running. So why on earth do human women live for decades after they can no longer have children? Think about how bizarre menopause actually is. A woman's fertility switches off somewhere around 50, but she can easily live to 70, 80, and beyond. 30 extra years of healthy, strong, capable life after her very last child. Almost no other animal does this. A female chimpanzee, our closest cousin, can technically breed into old age, but very few even survive long past their fertile years. Humans built a whole extra chapter of life that shouldn't be there. An anthropologist named Kristen Hawkes went looking for the reason. She spent years with the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer people in Tanzania, simply watching who did the work, who gathered the most food, hour after hour, day after day. And the answer astonished her. The hardest working, most productive foragers in the whole community were not the young mothers and not the men. They were the old women, the grandmothers. These grandmothers spent long, brutal hours out in the sun, digging deep tubers out of rock-hard ground, the kind of stubborn, calorie-rich roots that a small child simply cannot dig for itself. And they weren't feeding themselves. They were feeding their grandchildren. This is the grandmother hypothesis, and it is beautiful. A woman who stops having her own babies can pour every last scrap of her energy into the children who already exist, her daughter's children. By feeding a just-weaned toddler, a grandmother frees her daughter to have the next baby sooner and to keep it alive. More grandchildren survive, and those grandchildren carry her genes, including the genes for staying strong and useful long after fertility ends. Do you see what that means? Evolution may have invented grandmothers. The extraordinary length of a human life, that whole extra chapter after 50, may exist precisely because women who could no longer breed were worth so much alive. We may live long lives today because, deep in the past, non-breeding helpers were the difference between a child living and a child dying. And it was never only grandmothers. Look around that fire again. There's the aunt who never had children, the uncle who never paired off, someone who simply couldn't conceive. In a tiny band scraping a living out of a hard land, these people are not spare parts. They are something incredibly valuable, labor with no strings attached. An adult raising no children of their own has a resource almost nobody else in the group possesses, time and calories that aren't already spoken for. Every root that a nursing mother digs is half promised to the baby on her hip before it even leaves the ground. But every root a childless aunt digs is free. It can go straight to a niece, a nephew, a sick child, the weakest kid in the band. Biologists call it the helper at the nest effect, and they see it across the animal kingdom. In cooperative breeding species, the young survive at measurably higher rates when non-breeding adults are around to help. And here's the piece that makes it click. There's a rule in biology, worked out by a scientist named William Hamilton, about why an animal would ever help raise young that aren't its own. Your nieces and nephews share a quarter of your genes, so if you help 3 of them survive who otherwise would have died, then in the pure, cold ledger of genetics, you've done just as well as if you'd had a child yourself. Evolution doesn't only reward having babies. It rewards pushing your genes into the future, and pouring your life into your sister's children is another road to the very same place. So the childless hunter, the barren aunt, the gray uncle with empty arms, they weren't a failure of the system. In the brutal accounting of survival, they were often a net gain. They were the difference that let those impossibly expensive human children get raised at all. And this is where the whole story turns over. We've inherited a story about the deep past, and it's all about breeding. Pass on your genes, outcompete your rivals, the strongest male, the most fertile female, survival of the fittest, and fittest, we assume, means the one who had the most children. In that story, the person by the fire with no kids is a dead end, a branch of the tree that simply stops. But look again at what the science is actually telling us. Human children are so ruinously expensive that two parents alone cannot raise them, which means this: almost every human being who has ever survived to grow up was kept alive, at least in part, by someone who was not their parent. An aunt, a grandmother, an uncle, a helper with no children of their own, quietly pouring their one and only life into a child that wasn't theirs. We are not the lone wolf ape. We never were. We are the cooperative breeder, the one primate that raises its young as an entire village. And a village doesn't just need parents. It desperately needs villagers who aren't parents. It needs the hands that aren't already full. So the person at the fire with no children of their own was never sitting outside the story of human survival. They were holding the whole thing up. You might be alive, right now, reading this, because 100 centuries ago, a woman who never had a baby of her own chose to dig one more root out of hard ground and press it into the hands of a child that wasn't hers. So zoom all the way out, onto you. Somewhere back in your own family tree, not that far back, there was almost certainly a great aunt who never married, an uncle with no children, a grandmother who long outlived her own fertility, people history barely bothers to name. And quietly, invisibly, one of them may be the only reason a fragile ancestor of yours lived through a hard winter or a hungry year and grew up to pass their blood down the line that eventually became you. We love to measure a life by what it leaves behind. Children, a name carried forward, a branch that keeps on growing. But the deep history of our own species whispers something stranger and far kinder than that. It says a life can matter enormously without leaving a single child of its own. It says the people who raise no one can be the exact reason everyone else gets raised at all. So here's the question worth sitting with. We were taught that the whole point of a life is to pass it on, to make more of ourselves and hand the world to them. But if our entire species clawed its way to survival on the backs of people who never had children of their own, then maybe that was never really the point. So whose survival are you quietly holding up right now, without ever knowing their name and without them ever knowing yours?